As I'm sure many of you know, Foundry VTT is one of my favorite virtual tabletops to play Dungeons & Dragons. So in this video, I'm going to give you a basic tutorial to get started in creating your first world in Foundry. Let's get to it. When you buy Foundry, you'll get an email with a link, which should have the download file for Foundry as well as your product key. You'll want to make sure to save that somewhere or to archive the email that will also have it. You'll also need the license key if you decide later on that you want to host it online. So without further ado, let's jump into there. When you first download the game and you open it up, you'll come to a page that looks just like this. The first thing you need to do is to download your game system. So you'll want to go to Install System. If you are playing 5e like me, then you can just install D&D 5e. After about a minute or so, it will finish installing and you are good to go. But before we jump in there, I really quick want to recommend that you come over, check for updates, and update the game as needed. You may have to run Foundry in administrator mode in order to actually download the updates, but that's pretty easy. In this configuration tab, you can also add a password. So this is the password to be able to access all of these different settings and stuff. This is where your files are saved. So if you do decide to host it or you're swapping devices that you're going to be running it on, that is where you can find the files that you need to transfer over so that you don't lose everything. When you have a world, you can select the default world so that when you first log in, it'll have that world pulled up automatically. I don't really mess with any of the rest of the stuff, though if you are technically inclined, you can, but the defaults work just fine for me. So jumping over to creating a world, there is the install world button that I pretty much never use. I just create a world. We will title this one YouTube as it is for YouTube. Then we will select the game system that we are using. You can set a background image if you would like or put in when the next session is, but I don't really do that. Once you're here, you can delete the world, edit the world, or what we really want to do is launch the world. From here, the default, there's only one user that you can select, which will be Game Master. You don't have to put a password in. It shows the game details, which I almost always ignore because I never actually fill that information in, but you can. If you want to return back to the settings, you'll have to put the password in and then click return to setup. But we're going to jump into the game. When you first get in, it will look a lot like this. It gives a couple helpful little notes in the chat, which you can read, but I'm about to go over all of this stuff. Starting on the far right, we've got the settings. This thing, by the way, just changes that. So starting on the far right, we have settings. So to invite your players, you can click invitation link. This top link is what you would send to anyone on the same connection as you, so that are connected to your router. You can also access Foundry from a browser, from the computer that you're hosting, and log in as the game master from the browser. And again, you would use this link for that. If you're connecting through the internet, so somebody that's not on your local network, you will use this link. This red X means that the connection appears to be closed. People cannot actually connect to it. The reason for this is I have a VPN running right now, but if I turn that off, I can refresh it and a check mark will appear. See, and when you get that green check mark, you know that your players are good to connect. The community is pretty helpful, so if you ever have any issues, I do recommend reaching out to the community or reading through some of the forums. User management is where you can add new players. So you would just say create additional user, and you can add a password for them, and you can select their role. So whether they're a player, trusted player, assistant GM, or an additional GM. Here you can also access some of the additional player permissions. I don't use voice or video through Foundry. I typically prefer to use Discord, but you can set that up here if you want to use it through Foundry. I'm not going to go through each of these individually because they're all pretty much what you would expect. There are a few things to be mindful of. Do you want your players to be able to create new items? Maybe, maybe not. It's up to you. Though I will say I almost always get rid of this display cursor thing. So what it does is wherever your cursor is on the map, everyone sees a little dot. I don't ever find that helpful, but the rest of that stuff you can go through and figure out what feels appropriate for your table. All right, now that we're back on this screen, this is where you can go to add monsters or different items. It's your compendium. There's some mods that make this a little bit easier to use that I would definitely encourage adding. Next is audio player. This I think works better than the Roll20 audio. You can actually have bigger files on here to play, but it's still not amazing. They do have some cool things where you can add ambient noise in a specific area. So when they hover their token over an area, then they'll hear the noise. So that's pretty fun to play with. Next, they have card stacks and rollable tables. These are exactly what you would expect them to be. Though I will say when creating a folder, one of the nice things is it does allow you to nest the folders. This is the most you can nest it, but it does help with organization. I will say be careful putting too many things or monsters, items, etc. in there because it can slow your game down a little bit. So then we have journal entries. You can share these with the player so that they can read them. I often use this for things like bag of holding and things of that nature. And also, of course, notes for yourself. This would be where all of your items go. You can create items or you can pull them in from the compendium. Whenever you find what you want, you can click import and you'll see it pop up here. This is where you can create actors, which are your NPCs or PCs, which you can do so. So you'll select what you're creating. We're going to create Bob. He's going to be our example player. To add to inventory, you'll go to the items, drag and drop. Bob now has a sword. If you're leveling Bob up through Foundry, the easiest way to level up is to go to the compendium, look up classes. I think Bob might be a barbarian. We're just going to drag and drop. Then you can click apply and it will add the different features, and you can add all of his stats and his other stuff the good old fashioned way. There is a mod that I'll go over in another video that I really like where you can link it to D&D Beyond and you can hit a button and it just imports the character with their items and all of their levels and stats into Foundry, which is extremely useful because your players can level up their characters on D&D Beyond and you just hit a button and it imports them. So with the scene creator, this is where things get a lot more interesting and you can actually start playing the game. Right now, I cannot grab Bob and put him out on the map because there isn't a scene. So you'll create a scene, which we will call test. When you create a scene, you will then find a background image, which is the image of the scene that you want to use. You'll click on that. You'll click choose a file. It may default have you under core data. Just click over to user data. I have used an image before, so we're just going to click on this one. If not, I would have clicked select a file. Then you can click save changes. Yes, we now have our map. I hold right click to drag the map around, by the way. If you go into the grid, you can configure it, and this tool right here lets you adjust the size of the grid to make it match. You can follow the instructions. It's not too hard, but it can be a little bit time consuming. And once you get the grid squares lined up, you can hit save changes. Once we save the changes, we have our map. We can now take Bob, drag Bob out there. If we have any monsters, we can pull them out. So let's go ahead and pull a basilisk in here because why not? And then a bandit. And we'll pull a couple bandits out and a single basilisk. This game paused, by the way. Players can't move their characters around while the game is paused. Hit spacebar and it gets rid of it. The game is now going. In order to do combat, you can select all of the units. If you select everyone, then you right-click on any of them and toggle their combat state. This little fist is the combat tracker. You can right-click it, and it pops out in another tab. There's also a mod that lets you resize that. It's a good one. You can hit this button to roll initiative for everyone, this one to do it just for the NPCs. Then when you begin combat, you can hover over any of them and it will highlight whose turn it is. The players can end their turn on their combat, or you can hit next and it will roll through the combat order. It also tracks the rounds of combat that have taken place, so that's pretty cool. And you can empty the combat out by hitting the little trash can. To do attacks or anything, you would then just go click this little button here and it pops up in the chat. It also showed everyone's initiative rolls, which it's looking a little bogged down. I might clear that out. Then you can click to see what they attack. Do they have advantage, disadvantage, anything going on? Nope, just normal. Cool. And then was it a crit? Was it a normal hit? There's also mods and settings that you can adjust where when you crit, it automatically does max damage on the base. So instead of this, what you could do is if you go into config settings, there's all of the core settings and the permissions we already looked at earlier. Chat bubble's kind of cool. When somebody types something into chat, it pops up above their head. I do not like pan to token speaker because it pulls everyone's camera to whoever just said something. It's a little bit annoying. But the settings I really want to get into right here, you can change what a long rest or a short rest are, different rules. If you want there to be dexterity tiebreakers in the initiative order. But this one right here, critical damage, maximize dice. My players love this one. We typically use this. There's different mods that you can add that have it automatically roll the damage, things like that, which are pretty cool. Basically, if there's anything you don't like in Foundry, there's probably a mod that fixes it. All right, so then on the left, you have this menu here. So with this, you can measure distance. Also, pro tip, you can hold control, then click to drag your character, measure out the distance, and then slap the space bar and it will head there. All right, then for these, it's measuring things. So if you have a fireball, where do you want to place it? How many people does it hit? All of that fun stuff. Same with cones and all the different shapes. Moving our way down, this is the drawing. You can give, this is how you could select. You can give players permission to draw stuff, but let me tell you, if your players are able to draw stuff, you'll probably come back from a break at some point and see some dicks on your map. Just a warning. I will probably do an entire video on the different lighting things that you can do, but there's all kinds of different options where you can create a wall. If you hold control, then it keeps them linked. I really like their dynamic lighting situation and all the things that you have available with their walls. So you can do lighting like torches or a campfire, lanterns, things of that nature. I wouldn't actually use this for a torch because a torch would probably be attached to somebody. You can't actually attach this to somebody. But if you use it for a campfire, a lantern, anything like that, it's pretty cool. You can also go to sounds and you can add the crackling sound of a campfire, which is a nice touch. On the lighting, you can right click it to toggle it on and off when it's on. So many different settings. I want to bump the intensity up just a little bit. Let's say we've got a torch light, which is going to flicker a little bit. So if you go back and it is dark, they've got a bit of stuff going on. So, hold on, let me actually adjust. So if I go to the scene, and let's say I'm going to make this dark. It looks more like there could be a campfire. So if I put a little campfire dealio in the middle there, it could be pretty cool. And you can also get really weird with it. So a lot of flexibility and possibilities, but I really enjoy Foundry. It is, like I said, my favorite virtual tabletop tool just because of all the things that it can do. But even just using it for the basics, I really enjoy it. So that's pretty much all the stuff that you need to know to get started on Foundry. I'm going to do a couple more videos on specifics on Foundry to go into a bit more detail on some of my favorite modules and different things that you can do in there. But if you have any questions, always feel free to leave a comment or to reach out. I always enjoy helping new players. If you got value out of this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more D&D content, and I will see you next time. Thanks.